Hello everyone, this is Tom Fox. I'd like to welcome you to episode 244 of the FCPA Compliance and Ethics Report. The FCPA Compliance and Ethics Report is sponsored by Advanced Compliance Solutions, your one-stop shop for all things compliance and FCPA compliance related. Today I have with me Martin Polaine. Martin is one of the co-founders of the Amicus Legal Consultant group in the United Kingdom, and he and his team have developed a couple of very interesting tools that I stumbled across. I visited with them and asked them if they could come on the podcast to talk about them. The tools are called Solve Interactive and Solve Immersive, and these are technological solutions to issues that come up in your compliance investigations and in some of your compliance training. Martin explains how he developed these tools and how they are used in a FCPA, UK Bribery Act, or other anti-corruption compliance practice. The episode comes in at just over 25 minutes. I hope you enjoy it. Thank you very much for listening. Hello everyone, this is Tom Fox. I'd like to welcome you to this episode of the FCPA Compliance and Ethics Report. Today you are in for a very interesting and informative treat. I have Martin Polaine. Martin is a barrister in the United Kingdom, and he works at Amicus Legal Consultants. And he and his partner have developed a couple of very interesting tools that they use in, frankly, a wide variety of their legal practice. But I found it very interesting in its potential application to the anti-bribery, anti-corruption world. So, Martin, with that somewhat long-winded introduction, thank you for coming on the podcast today.
Well, Tom, thank you very much. It's good to be invited, and it's obviously nice to speak with you and your listeners.
Now, Martin, you didn't fall off the truck yesterday. You've been practicing law for, as we would say in Texas, for quite some time. Could you give us a little bit of background and kind of what led you to Amicus Legal Consultants at this point?
Yeah, sure. As you said, Tom, been a lawyer for some time. I've been a barrister for 30 years, and in fact, my colleague Arvinder Sambi beats me by a year. She was called to the bar in '85, so she's coming up to 31 years experience. Both Arvinder and I spent a fair bit of our career as prosecutors, dealing with anti-corruption cases, also dealing with terrorism, with international cooperation, so both mutual legal assistance and extradition, also the fight against organized crime. I think it's fair to say that both Arvinder and I, in our respective prosecutorial practices, found ourselves advising a number of developing countries in their criminal justice framework, and also providing technical assistance to prosecutors, judges, and investigators, both in Europe with EU accession work, and also across sub-Saharan Africa and Southeast Asia. And I think it was all those experiences that really informed our decision to set up Amicus Legal Consultants in early 2008. In the period just before that, we'd spent a few years helping the British Commonwealth with its anti-corruption program, particularly in the wake of the UN Convention, with UNCAC compliance, obviously a big issue for particularly smaller Commonwealth states. And so we thought, well, perhaps we could bring the best of both worlds, the best of the public sector to the private sector world. So when we set up, we tried to practice, of course, substantive law, but also to continue with the capacity building work, and also further develop our interest in really the two tools or methods that you alluded to at the outset. In other words, anonymized debriefing, and also the running of immersive exercises that really encourage participants to test their decision making, to rehearse their decision making, and also to grapple with some sometimes very, very difficult issues of risk assessment and risk management.
Now, Martin, you've actually worked with the OECD, the Working Group on Bribery. Can you tell us what you did in that role?
Yeah, sure, Tom. Yes, I was for 6 going on to 7 years. I was the UK's legal representative on the OECD bribery working group. So I was there at the working group meetings when we were discussing the peer reviews of the states party to the convention. I also undertook some of those reviews. You may be aware, and your listeners will probably be aware, that each of the OECD country reviews has two lead examiners. So two countries will review aspects of the legislative framework and the implementation framework of a third OECD state. And I was involved in some of those peer reviews, including, I suppose, a particularly challenging one, which was the peer review of Italy back in 2003, 2004. And that was a review I conducted with other UK colleagues and also with German colleagues. I was also involved in the OECD's outreach work. So that included negotiations with the Russian Federation on Russia becoming a party to the convention. Also included work in sub-Saharan Africa that led to South Africa, again, becoming a party to the convention. And I think the interesting thing about the work of the OECD Bribery Working Group is that although, of course, on one level, it's very focused on foreign bribery, in another way, I think it could be said that the Bribery Working Group over the years has really been in the vanguard of pushing forward the anti-corruption agenda. And I think if one looks at the rigors with which a number of institutions carry out their evaluations now, a lot of that I think is owed to the work of the OECD's evaluation mechanism. And I think particularly on some of the difficult issues, agents and intermediaries, indirect bribery and the use of third parties, issues around the wider definition, of course, of public official. I think a lot of those discussions, a lot of the potential tools were perhaps given, if not a first airing, at least a first detailed airing through and in the work of the Bribery Working Group. So I think an exciting body to be part of, particularly for the length of time that I was.
Well, with the notation that I've been practicing law 33 years, so it's nice to talk to some younger folks for a change. But why don't we talk about these tools, because I've had the chance to look at them, and I was particularly struck with how powerful they could be to help a compliance practitioner, a CCO, or an outside consultant such as you all in helping a company take a look at really a lot of issues. But the first one that struck me is how far down has compliance been burned into the DNA of a company? So with that, could you tell us about the Solve Interactive tool?
Yes, of course. We've got these two tools, Solve Interactive and Solve Immersive. Solve Interactive is really an anonymized debriefing method. Now, probably wondering what that is. Let me start by saying this. I think we've found that a real challenge for any business or any organization is how to get open, honest, and constructive dialogue going, particularly amongst members of staff, perhaps other stakeholders, agents, etc., and especially after there's been perhaps a crisis or a critical incident. It could be a whistleblower that's come forward. It could be new management who've perhaps uncovered a suspicion of bribery having taken place. Or it could simply be the challenge of needing to get honest views about whether processes, procedures, policies would actually work, whether there are gaps or vulnerabilities. And we were looking at ways in which an organization or a business could be able to meaningfully map out a way forward. And it seemed to us that anonymized debriefing is perhaps a good solution to that. We were focusing on the need for honest and direct discussion, really as being the key to, I suppose, any successful development of a corporate policy. So whether it's anti-corruption, anti-fraud, compliance procedures, or even human resource procedures, it seemed to us you need to have that honest and very direct discussion. And of course, we know that in the real world, all sorts of constraints get in the way of that. Could be the straight hierarchical constraint, the more junior employee being very guarded about what they say if they're in company with their superiors. It could be, in some jurisdictions, gender issues, or even issues, for instance, that we sometimes encounter in South Asia around caste. So we were looking for ways to actually break all that down. We also find that if you don't have the sort of approach we've got, you can often face a situation where one voice or a few voices will dominate the discussion or the examination that's taking place. So that's really the prelude. So what we created was a method which is supported by software, by a software platform, but it's a method that allows for a candid expression of views and literally a dialogue through the use of laptops or other devices. Every participant will have a laptop or other device. So what we'll typically do is, if we get called in by a business, let's say to examine its compliance procedures, depending the position that business is at, the dynamic of that business, we might find ourselves conducting a number of separate sessions with different aspects of the business, the compliance, the in-house legal, the HR, the sales force, operations, whatever it might be. And we'll start with very open-ended questions. The idea being that every participant has a laptop in front of him or her, can make any comment he or she wants to, but can also, very importantly, see the comments that other people are making, but not who's actually making them. And then each of these participants has the opportunity to comment on anybody else's comments, or in fact every comment if they wish, to the nth degree. So you get literally a dialogue being created. You get challenges being put out to perhaps comments that other people have made. You may get people using these sessions almost in a cathartic way to bring out views, opinions, experiences. And the underlying idea is that we'll identify perhaps gaps, vulnerabilities in a policy or procedure, and indeed strengths, and we'll work with the participants to actually arrive at solutions, and importantly, aiming to have the solutions coming from the participants themselves. We're always very uncomfortable, as I'm sure a lot of facilitators are, in trying to suggest or impose solutions from outside. Much better if it comes from within the business. And we find with this sort of discussion going on, albeit on a screen, that one will arrive at solutions. We'll do that through splitting the session into open-ended questions and gradually more pointed, more directed questions that are actually compiled by the very participants who are taking part, so not by us. And then we'll intersperse the questions, and they might get 10 or 15 minutes per question, really to give a stream of consciousness. We'll intersperse those with oral facilitation as well. It's an approach that we can do remotely, and we've certainly done that around the world remotely, but we like it to take place with participants at a single location, in a room, because obviously then when it comes to the oral facilitation, it's much more immediate and frankly much more penetrating. And over the years we've of course honed the sort of techniques we use. Typically for an organization we find that with a half-day session one can pinpoint major issues, minor issues, issues that people just won't be aware of, and actually arrive at very much tangible solutions. I mean, to give an example, a few months ago we found ourselves with a request from a global financial services brand who had had a particular critical incident occur within the organization. There'd been a crisis response of sorts, but it had been unsatisfactory. They didn't quite know why that crisis response had failed. Within the space of about 4.5 hours, with 11 key participants, we found ourselves not only having the participants identify all the issues, but actually arrive at the key workable solutions. And now, in conjunction with the organization, we're taking that forward to actually help hone the policies and procedures themselves that have been created consequent on the session. And if I think back to the work we did across Central and Eastern Europe on EU accession, where we ran these sorts of anonymized debriefing exercises in a climate obviously post-communist, where very often participants had no tradition of giving frank and honest views, we found that very quickly people would buy into this, people would work constructively through this method to actually get something that was not just some idealistic way forward, but was actually a workable, tangible delivery of exactly what needed to be put in place or what needed to take place. So we find ourselves now using the anonymized debriefing, the Solve interactive system, in a number of settings. When it comes to our anti-corruption work, pre and debriefing critical incidents, it might be the whistleblower that's come forward, for instance, examining internal investigations, the planning and debriefing of internal investigations, also working through the difficult issues very often around self-reporting, around the effect of legal professional privilege. We know how difficult the judgment calls can be when it comes to assertion of privilege against the background of an internal investigation or the issue of who does the company report to the authorities at this stage or not. Also, stress testing and examining existing policies and procedures that might be in place. And of course, both in the US and in the UK, businesses are rightfully concerned around the need to have adequate procedures in place. And of course, with the UK's Bribery Act coming into force in mid-2011, businesses here and given the wide jurisdictional reach in other parts of the world, have I know been engaging in much examination about what needs to be in place and what is a proportionate procedure to minimize the risk of corruption. And we've found that with that impetus, businesses have used this approach to get that very honest answer, not just from employees, but from those working with the business, particularly agents and intermediaries. And obviously that's a key area of vulnerability. We also find that when it comes to testing organizational structures, particularly in the context of joint ventures, either a joint venture where a new entity has been, a new legal entity has been created, or even a contractual joint entity, we find is particularly valuable in that sort of setting. Also, when one's looking to build coordination on multi-party, multi-projects, so it could be obviously construction, it could be extractive industries where we know real vulnerabilities. We've found it tremendously valuable there. Probably like us, you've come across circumstances where in a joint venture, the different joint venture partners have got different codes of conduct, for instance. And if one's looking at the corruption risk, obviously there's a real area of vulnerability. Joint venture partners will often feel slightly protective, perhaps even territorial about their own codes. It sometimes takes this sort of approach to break down the barriers. Importantly, I think in the anti-corruption context, we also use it to identify in a very realistic sense the training need of an organization, actually finding out what meaningful practical training needs to be in place and what will achieve the best, most sustainable results. Again, probably like us, you and no doubt a lot of the listeners have sometimes been frustrated by seeing training which is unimaginative or which is just classroom style based. We like to use this system to develop and then of course deliver very practical training that's going to be honing in at the key sustainable results, particularly around difficult decision making at times when there is a risk either of conflict of interest or a wider corruption risk that needs to be addressed. We also, I suppose, finally...
that would be a good point. Maybe we could move to talk about the immersive tool.
Yes, absolutely.
Move use that in a wide variety of. I really liked you talked about crisis response, and certainly the immersive tool could help companies along appraising rather critical incidents. But how could tell us about the immersive tool, because I see that as a great
Yeah.
learning tool.
Absolutely. Yes, the immersive tool and the accompanying immersive method is really aiming to create a real life situation within the confines of a training or procedure testing setting. So, for instance, we're conscious that businesses very often only ever assess or appraise their decision making and their responses perhaps once an event or a crisis has taken place. I think it's better to run a real lifestyle simulation to have the chance to make the decisions you would make in real life, but in a safe environment. So if you get it wrong, the only consequence is the consequence within that training or testing setting. So for the immersive, we create a rich multimedia environment. We'll create news feeds, social media, documentation, video and audio briefings, so that an incident, a case can, in a very real sense, come to life. So it might be, for instance, a case involving perhaps corruption in the extractive industries, where the crisis is the whistleblower who's come forward across jurisdictions. Suddenly there are real issues for the crisis management team or the in-house legal. Do we take a statement from this person? Do we do an audio recorded statement or a written one? What do we do to fulfill our duty of care? Do we house them in a safe house somewhere? What sort of internal investigation is going to take place? How do we handle the media? Because, of course, we know in real life, when you get a crisis or a critical incident, it's not linear. There are lots of things happening at the same time, and things are very dynamic. This immersive system is by its nature dynamic. So we can see responses actually taking place. We can adapt the facts that are coming out, the feeds that are coming out, to meet the responses that are taking place. So to give an idea how this all pans out, let's say we're running it for a crisis management team. A typical crisis management team might be comprised of 4 or 5 separate disciplines: the communications, the in-house legal, the IT, the human resources, etc. What we'll do is have each of those in a breakout setting, carrying out their professional responsibilities, what they would do in their real lives. We'll feed into that breakout room the feeds, the documentation, the material. We'll have audio and video streaming of the decision-making dynamic within the room, so we can debrief on that. We can also feed in real time additional facts, additional challenges. It could be phone calls from the press. It could be the results of an internal investigation. It might be a financial investigator's come up with additional material from within the company. All these sorts of things that one has to wrestle with. There's a time critical element to it. Each of these breakouts might take 40 minutes, an hour, depending on the situations being faced. Suddenly a group might find itself with a lot less time than it originally thought, because it might be reporting back to a board of directors who want an answer in 5 minutes, not in the anticipated 30 minutes. So all the real life challenges are set out within the exercise itself. And it's fully facilitated, so we'll have subject matter experts with us that we can literally put in to one of the rooms when there's a request for assistance. Typically, Arvinder and I, or sometimes some of our in-house colleagues from clients, will facilitate the exercise. We run exercises, everything from a half day to, I think the longest we've ever done was a counter-terrorism exercise in Kenya, in East Africa, which was in real time, 2 weeks. And there we were running an exercise for all the responsible government, law enforcement, and intelligence agencies. But typically, within the anti-corruption setting, within the commercial setting, a one-day exercise, I suppose, is the norm. And we find that across all sectors. At the moment, we're particularly active, for instance, in the sports sector with issues around match fixing, sports corruption, and issues around sports governance. Equally, the vulnerable sectors, the pharmaceuticals, the construction, the extractives, but also companies in sectors not ordinarily recognized as being vulnerable, but perhaps companies who are dealing with importing and exporting, perhaps to difficult jurisdictions, perhaps they're working with partners in vulnerable regions of the world and want to play out not just the typical anti-corruption challenges, but also the underlying cultural and societal issues that also play a part as well. So again, it's yes, it's learning, yes, it's training, but it's also the testing of procedures and policies. And after an immersive exercise, again, typically we'll have clients who say, look, in the light of that, we want to work with you to perhaps amend or hone some of the procedures we have. And what we do, because we're at Amicus, we're still a relatively small company, so we will work in conjunction with law firms. We work with some of the very large international law firms, and we tend to be very relaxed about branding, for instance. So we'll find ourselves working perhaps sometimes under the brand of a law firm, sometimes under our own brand, but law firms seem to find that because we're small, we're not a challenge. We're not going to, to be blunt, we're not going to poach clients. Equally, and lawyers are always worried about that, aren't they?
Yes.
But equally, we bring an added skill and an added skill set. So we tend to build very good relationships with law firms and with other professional service advisors. So whether it's accountancy firms, business consultants, or specialist crisis management companies.
Well, Martin, unfortunately, we're near the end of our time, but I was wondering if anyone wanted to follow up with you or our vendor directly or learn more about the firm and these tools we've talked about, how would they do so?
Yes, we'd be very happy for that, either through our website or by email or telephone. The website is www.amicuslegalconsultants.com. Our individual email addresses are on that website. People are very happy very welcome to contact us on that. Alternatively, by telephone here in the UK on +44 207 831 4882. And I should say that although we're London-based, we've literally got a global reach. So we work around the world, and we also work in both common law and civil law jurisdictions. I think that's perhaps an added value we might bring.
Well, Martin, I really appreciate you taking the time to visit with us, and I look forward to continuing the conversation.
Tom, thank you very much for having me. I appreciate that, and all the very best to you and, of course, to your listeners. Thank you so much.